If I were to ask you, and I'm not, because it's a rhetorical question, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if I were to ask you to fill in the blank with the sentence goes like this: I love blank. I mean, you can think about it. I love blank. I imagine that some of the blanks that are filled in would go like this. I love so-and-so, a name. I love my family. I love the Yankees. I love chocolate. I love it when you laugh. I love a sunny day. There are so many ways in which love can take hold of us, what things that we express love for. It has so many, many dimensions. I want to open up the idea that there are these many dimensions, if not more. It's not a competition. Love is also a multi-dimensional word, concept in our tradition. And so today, I want to ask you to join me in a conversation about Jewish voices talking about love. The material that you have, the source sheet, is called Jewish Voices Are Talking About. When I began this role as the Chief Jewish Learning Officer here, I like bringing the Jewish text to the table so that the conversation has a jumping off point. This is not the place where it ends. And so when I say Jewish voices are talking about love, I'm bringing in these pages what voices over time have said about the subject, but there are other voices that have what to say, and those could be yours as well if you choose to participate. So I've got a series of things Jewish voices are talking about. This is the most recent one, and later on I'll tell you what the genesis of this source sheet and this idea about talking about love today, where it came from. So the first place I'd like to start, okay? Good. If I don't hear anything, I'm going to keep going. All right. First place I'd like to start is on the front page where, before I get to source number one, I want to say what my son-in-law would say about this definition of love. I think he would say, you know, this is like straight up love. I mean, this is romantic, beautiful. It's just straight up. Here's the example I want to give. Look at number one. This comes from the story of Abraham being the first Jew, he and Sarah, being the first Jewish couple, knowing that their mission can't be complete unless they have a family, unless they have children to whom to give the charge, to carry on for them. So as background, he sends his servant, by the way, he's never named, but we assume it's his servant Elazar, to go find a wife for his son Isaac. So Elazar goes on this trip, and he meets this woman, Rebecca, and through a series of signs or intuition, he decides this is the woman for my master's child, my master's son, and he brings Rebecca back to meet Isaac. Now here is where the narrative picks up. Someone's just joined us, and we're on page one of the handouts, the very, very first source.
Thank you.
Okay. Then Rebecca and her maids arose. They mounted the camels and followed the man. They followed Abraham's servant Elazar back to Abraham's family. And as they're going along the way, Isaac, the intended groom, was settled in the region of the Negev. So that's where they went. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and looking up, he saw the camels approaching. Now here's the Hebrew. It says, "Vatisa Rivka et eineha, vatera et Yitzchak, vatipol me'al hagamal." And I want to bring you the translation that I found in the JPS. Raising her eyes, Rebecca saw Isaac. So here's the scene. Now Elazar is bringing Rebecca to meet Isaac. Isaac is walking in the field. Rebecca sees Isaac from afar. Rebecca saw Isaac. She alighted from her camel. I'm going to say, wait a minute. Alighted it's a nice kind of appropriate translation. But if you look at the Hebrew word, and if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to try and make you familiar with it right now. Vatipol me'al hagamal literally means she fell off her camel. She saw Isaac from afar, and the impact it made on her was so powerful she fell off her camel. The word vatipol, to the best of my knowledge, is used one more time in all of Tanakh and all of Jewish scripture, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. And the only other time it appears is also in a sexual or erotic reference. She was blown over by seeing Isaac. So she alighted from the camel, let us say. and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field toward us?" And the servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. What happened from Isaac's point of view? Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her. This is straight out love, and thus found comfort after his mother's death. Look at number 2, another example. I'm sorry, it's actually number 4 because we had this Hebrew text as well. Look at source number 4. There's another expression straight up. Yes, Ruth, yes, please.
We actually don't have numbers on the sheet I'm looking at anyway.
Do the others of you have numbers? Anybody?
I have numbers.
Okay. Ruth, do you think, can you follow? I'm on the first page. I'll tell you when I'm changing.
I'll be able to follow.
Okay. So I'll tell you when I'm changing pages. I'm sorry about that. So here's another example where love is used in the terms, the romantic love that some of us are familiar with. Jacob loved Rachel. This is already Isaac's son, Jacob. He loved Rachel, so he said, "I will work for you." To Laban, he said, Rachel's father, "I'll work for you for 7 years." So Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him a few days because of his love for her. Time flew for him because he loved Rachel. So I'm just trying to bring as the first kind of textual reference that in our Holy Scriptures, in our Torah, the Torah is very, very clear about talking about romantic love or erotic love or the attraction between people in a romantic kind of way. Bottom of page 1, who do you love? Okay, here's where we're going to take a little bit of we're going to magnify this question a little bit, this idea a little bit. The Talmud brings this. There was a certain man who was saying about his marriage as he walked. Now I want to stop myself and say, why does the Talmud go out of its way to say there was a certain man who was saying about his marriage as he walked? This passage comes in the midst of several similar passages where people are talking Torah as they're walking. And I just want to digress by saying it's really very, very instructive and very beautiful. Because when we say the Shema Yisrael, you should love the Lord your God, which we'll get to later, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and you should speak these words when you lie down, when you get up, when you walk by the way. Okay? So every time you're awake, everywhere you go, you should be speaking these words of Torah. And so these are words of Torah that people are talking about while they're walking. I just think it's very neat. There was a certain man who was saying about his marriage as he walked. When our love was strong, we could have slept on a bed that was the width of a sword's blade. Now that our love is not strong, a bed of 60 cubits is not enough for us. Rav Huna said, here comes Rav Huna. This man was talking about, the relationship between spouses. And sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it could be a little bit distancing. And Rav Huna says, you know what? There's something Jewish about this. Let me tell you what it is. He says, verses are written that convey these sentiments. It says, initially it was written, I will meet you there and I will speak with you from above the ark cover. What does that mean? I'm continuing reading. At first, when God had great affection for Israel, like a husband and wife, the divine presence was revealed within the confines of this limited space. Moses would stand in front of the Ark of the Covenant, inches away from God's presence, and they would converse. Because there was an intimate relationship. I'm going to the second page. At the end, when Israel sinned, the whole of the space of the temple was not expansive enough for the divine presence to rest within it. As it is written, thus says the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. This place isn't big enough for me. I need to get very, very far away from you. And so how does he conclude Rav Huna with the parable with the man and his wife, who sometimes are close and sometimes are distant? In times of discord, the temple is an insufficient resting place to the divine presence. So here we go right away. We've got this idea of romantic love, but also a connection to the relationship between God and his people. I'm going to stop here. Any questions, any comments?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about love in the Talmud, but it doesn't define it. I mean, it just said it happened, so it doesn't give any source of why.
Which part are you talking about, Michael?
I'm just talking about whether it was Rebecca with Isaac, they fell in love. What does that mean? I mean, there's no meaning.
It's a good question. The Torah is telling us about the relationship with these people, between these people, and how the relationship developed. And I think it uses the word v'ahavta, to love, very advisedly, because it's not always the case between people, even between spouses in the Torah, that the word v'ahavta or ahava is used. And I'll also say that the Torah, in understand this is me not talking, I don't know, but in answer to your questions is to try to respond to you. The Torah acknowledges that every relationship is different, and to talk about the relationship between Rebecca and Jacob, or the relationship between Isaac and Rachel and Jacob, or Rebecca and Isaac. I think what it's doing is it's leaving you many, many, many degrees of freedom to decide how you and your spouse will express that love, rather than providing a paradigm that you need to aspire to. I'm on page 2 now, and I want to talk about the section says the Holy of Holies, more about this kind of idea of erotic love. This may sound familiar to you. Source 6. This is a woman speaking. She says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine." It comes from the Song of Songs. Number 7, this is the male saying, "You have captured my heart, my own, my bride. You have captured my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one coil of your necklace. How sweet is your love, my own, my bride. How much more delightful your love than wine, your ointments more fragrant than any spice. Sweetness drops from your lips, O bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the scent of your robes is like the scent of Lebanon." This is from the Song of Songs, both of these phrases. And the Song of Songs is in our Bible. It's written by King Solomon, and there was a big debate among the rabbinic leadership as they were canonizing our scriptures as to whether the Song of Songs would be included or not. And the debate rested on does this kind of language belong in our Torah? Until Rabbi Akiva came along and he made the most persuasive argument. This is what he said. He said, our Torah is holy, yes, but the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies, this kind of language, this kind of interaction. And yes, Rabbi Akiva went on to say, and other rabbis go on to expound, that this kind of language, this relationship between the man and the woman, is really a metaphor, or can be taken as a metaphor between a man and a woman, with God playing one role and the people of Israel playing the other role, and the relationship between the two, the love and the affection between the two. But let me say this. This metaphor would be completely irrelevant if it didn't rely on the human experience of love, romantic, erotic human love. So this is the Torah again, recognizing this, celebrating this, giving it a place of holiness in our text, this romantic love between people. Further, just another couple of sources to round this out, this idea about romantic love. Number 8, this comes from the Seder of Rabbi Eliyahu Rabbah, which, according to legend, was dictated by Elijah the prophet to, I don't remember his name, but he lived in the 10th century, and he wrote this: "Love is the greatest pleasure open to man." And number 9, this is from Isaac of Bravanel, one of the greatest commentaries on our Torah. He says, he lived in Spain in the 15th century, "Love turns one person into two and two into one." So I'm going to open this up if any of you have any suggestions. I get the 2 into 1. Do any of you have any thoughts on what it means when love turns one person into two? Any thoughts you want to share?
I would say that as opposed to each of us as individuals focusing on ourselves alone, it makes us focus on two people instead.
I think that's a really nice idea, and I appreciate that. Anyone else? Okay, just I'm asking because when I read it the first time, I was wondering what he meant, and I appreciate that, Ruth. Thank you very much. So let's look at number 10, and before that there's a picture of a full moon, and it says the 15th of Av in French, love and renewal, love and rebirth. So why are we talking about love today, and why do we have these sheets called Jewish Voices of Talking About Love? I just want to give a little credit where credit is due. My role here is at the Federation, part of my role is to work with our volunteer and professional leadership to provide Jewish content and context for our work. So recently, our FRD, we call that Financial Resource Development Professionals. It's all the professionals who work on our annual campaign and on our Jewish Community Foundation. We get together every once in a while, but we got together recently for a full-day retreat. And Rebecca Pollack, who's our vice president for our campaign, came to me in advance of our retreat, and she said, you know, Tu B'Av is coming up. Why don't you do something on, she said actually, Tisha B'Av and Tu B'Av are coming up. Why don't you do something on one of those? So I think it's fantastic, by the way, that I'm just delighted that she asked. And that's the genesis of this, because the conversation that we're having now is similar to the conversation that we had among our professionals just recently. So let's talk about what Tu B'Av is. Tu is the Hebrew letters Tet and Vav, which if you sound it out phonetically is 2, so it's not the numeral 2. They correspond to the numbers 9 and 6, which adds up to 15. So it's a complicated way of saying Tu B'Av is the 15th of Av, the 15th day of the month of Av. And by the way, that begins tonight and tomorrow is the 15th of Av. So let's talk about what the 15th of Av is and why we're talking about love. I'm looking at number 10. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, there were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av and as Yom Kippur. As on these days, the daughters of Jerusalem would emerge in white garments, which each woman borrowed from another. Why did they borrow garments? They did so as not to embarrass one who did not have her own white garments. Just want to pause here and say, I think that's a very beautiful egalitarian, communal kind of idea that, because you'll see what they did with these garments, that we're all kind of equal here and no one should have a leg up or too much of a leg up on the others. This source actually comes from 2 different places in the Talmud, so parenthetically the next 2 lines come from the parallel source, but I included it here. The daughters, because it explains why they borrowed the gowns and what they did, the daughters of the Jewish people would go out and dance in the vineyards. One who did not have a wife would turn there to find one. So this has become, for many, many centuries, a day of Jewish romance and finding matches and establishing families. And recently, with, now in our modern culture, a comparison is being made between Tu B'Av and Valentine's Day. So if you turn to page 3, there's actually a study done recently by the Jewish People Policy Institute in Israel just a few months ago. By the way, the JPPI was established by the Jewish Agency for Israel, one of our major beneficiaries overseas, to study trends and talk about trends and policies for the global Jewish people. And they did something kind of interesting. They compared perceptions in Israel about Valentine's Day versus Tu B'Av. And you'll see that still, Tu B'Av is the day in Israel where more romantic gestures are made, even with the advent of Valentine's Day. And only and clearly Valentine's Day is known in Israel. Only 10% of respondents didn't know what Valentine's Day was, but still Tu B'Av has this aura of this romance that comes from the biblical, from Talmudic origin, which we just referenced. So I'm going to continue underneath the chart on page 3. So the Talmud continues with the story about why Tu B'Av is such a great day. Look, granted that Yom Kippur is a day of joy, isn't it obvious? It says, because it is a day of pardon and forgiveness. And moreover, it is a day on which the last tablets of the covenant were given. But what's special about the 15th of Av? So there are several reasons, and I'm bringing 3. Number 1, the first bullet point. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says, this was the day when the members of different tribes were permitted to marry into one another's tribe. So again, marriage, romance. Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan offered another explanation. The 15th of Av was the day when the tribe of Benjamin was permitted to enter the congregation of the other tribes of Israel through marriage. Again, consolidating the people, having the people grow through marriage. Here's a crazy one. Rav Dimi Bar Yosef says that Rav Nachman says, the 15th of Av was the day on which those designated to perish in the wilderness stopped dying. So we've got marriage, stopped dying. As the entire generation that had left Egypt died due to the sin of the spies. So, we've got these reasons why we celebrate Tu B'Av, and I want to delve into this last item about the cessation of the death of the spies to elaborate a little bit more. Okay, so I'm on source number 12 towards the bottom of page 3. This is what the spies told them. This comes from our Torah when Moses sent out spies to spy out the land before they were about to cross the Jordan. This was very, very early very soon after they left Egypt. They were prepared to cross the Jordan River and enter into the land of Canaan. And Moses sent out spies. I'm sure you're familiar with this. 12 spies, one representing each tribe, to spy out the land. And here's what they came back with. They came back with a report that says, "We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." And the fruit was gargantuan. So everything's terrific. If you look at the Hebrew, here's the next thing they said. FS, which means however. Here's a but. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. And what ensued was an entire panic. And the Jews saying, "Oh, whoa, wait a minute. This is going to be bad. This is going to be hard. We can't overtake them. We can't enter the land. We will be slaughtered." And so that's ... And I'm going to continue where God picks up and he says to them, "Your children," says, "I'm really annoyed at you. So here's what's going to happen. Your children, these I will allow to enter. They shall know the land that you have rejected. But your carcasses shall drop in this wilderness, while your children roam the wilderness for 40 years, suffering for your faithlessness, until the last of your carcasses is down in the wilderness." This is the reason the Torah gives for the Jews wandering in the desert for 40 years. Their mission in Canaan lasted 40 days, and they came back and they cried. The day they came back and they give this report and they cried was the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. And God said, almost like parents will say today, he said, "You want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. For the next 40 years, you're going to be winnowed down till you're all gone, and only your children, those under the age of 20, will enter the promised land." So what's the connection between this story and Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av? So I want to share a legend with you. It's a legend. It's got no scriptural basis. It's a scary thing that you wouldn't tell your children, but here's where we go. The way that this decree was enacted was that every year on Tisha B'Av, the day that God gave them this curse, every year on Tisha B'Av, the Jews in the desert would sleep in their graves. And the next morning, those who woke up, and those who didn't were buried. And this happened every year for 40 years. Until one year, they went to sleep in their graves on the 9th of Av, and the next morning, everybody woke up. And they said, "Wait a minute, we must have the date wrong. So we'll do it again tonight." And they slept in their graves that night as well. And this happened for 3 or 4 days until one night they saw a full moon. A full moon is the 15th of the month, which was proof to them that the 9th had passed indeed, and that the curse of the dying was over. And so this became a great day of holiday, a great holiday. It's one of the reasons why we celebrate Tu B'Av as a holiday. And I'm going to get to the connection at the very, very end. The curse was placed on them on Tisha B'Av. If you look at page 4, the top of page 4, it's an artistic depiction of what happened to the Jews on the 9th of Av for the first temple destroyed by the Babylonians in the year 586 BCE, and again by the Romans on the 9th of Av in the year 70 CE. By the way, in today's news this morning, I heard about a report of an archaeological find in Israel that was reported on Sunday, which was Tisha B'Av, that showed some archaeological evidence. It was on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. It was a layer of soot, and embedded in the soot were arrows and jewelry, bespeaking the fact that there was a civilian battle, a slaughter that took place on that time. And it was dated to the first temple. It was Babylonian artifacts. So if the temple was destroyed 2 times, the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed because of lots of reasons. There was a military might, there were other reasons as well. But what the rabbis do is when we're faced with a calamity, they try to extract some meaning that can propel us forward. And so they said, this may be familiar to you, they said, what was one of the reasons that the second temple was destroyed? They said it's because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred from one Jew to another. baseless hatred from one Jew to another. And so I'm asking this question rhetorically, but the question would be, if sinat chinam, baseless hatred, was powerful enough to cause the destruction, what is the lesson we extract from this? What is the lesson we take from this to move forward? And so you might say, well, if baseless hatred was the poison, the antidote is baseless love, free love from one Jew to another. And so Rav Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of then Palestine, before Israel even became a state, in the first part of the 20th century, Rav Kook anticipates our antidote, free love, baseless love. And so look at number 15. Here's what he says. He says, there's no such thing as baseless love. Why baseless? This other person is a Jew, and I am obligated to honor him. There's only baseless hatred, but baseless love, no. What a crazy idea. I'm obligated to honor him. I want to go now to bottom of page 4 and show us some love in other textual references so that we see the many dimensions of the love that our tradition brings to us. Look at number 16. This is going to be very, very familiar to all of us. And you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Here it is. Love your fellow as yourself. Yahavta l'reacha kamocha. This is it, right here. I am the Lord. Now, Rabbi Akiva, our friend Rabbi Akiva comes and says, love your fellow as yourself. Rabbi Akiva said, this is a fundamental principle of the Torah. By the way, this is the only thing in the Torah for which Rabbi Akiva says this. Love your neighbor as yourself, a fundamental principle of the Torah. So I'm going to ask you, because Michael asked this before, what kind of romantic love? What does it mean? So now I'll ask the question. How do you love your neighbor as yourself? What might that mean? How would you love your neighbor as yourself? I'm open to any suggestions. And if not, that's okay too. Yes?
To be treated like you would like to be treated.
Michael, it sounds so simple, but let's keep going. Look on the top of page 5. It's all about you. This is the story of Purim. Now, I'll tell you to where we're up to in the story. We're up to this part of the story where Mordechai the Jew tipped off Achashverosh to an assassination plot. And Achashverosh had the plotters killed, and this episode was entered in the king's record book. One night the king couldn't sleep, and he calls upon his courtiers to read him his diary, and in this record book, the story is told about how Mordechai saved Achashverosh's life. And the king says, was anything done to thank Achashverosh? And his courtiers say, no. So as he's thinking, Haman enters. Haman, to refresh our memory, he's the bad guy. Haman enters, and the king, source 17 on page 5, Haman entered, and the king Achashverosh asked him, because I just set it up for you. What should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor? Haman said to himself, who would the king desire to honor more than me? So thinking it's about him, Mike, is what he said. So Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king desires to honor, I've got a 6-point plan. Let royal garb, which the king has worn, be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been set, and let the attire and the horse be put in the charge of one of the king's noble courtiers, and let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse throughout the city square, while they proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Quick then, said the king to Haman, get the garb and the horse, as you have said, and do this to Mordechai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Omit nothing of all that you have proposed. So Haman, while being jealous and thinking about how would the king want to honor me, proposes the exact formula that's appropriate for honoring somebody else. Now look at source number 18, and I'm going to fast forward 600 years as the laws about how Jews help each other become codified. Here's the source text. If there is a needy person among you, one of your kinsmen in any of your settlements in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman. Rather, you must open your hand and lend him enough underline, for whatever he needs. And the Talmud says, what does that mean for whatever he needs? And continuing, the sages also taught, listen to this example. This includes even a horse upon which to ride and a servant's run in front of him for the sake of his stature. If necessary, for someone accustomed to these advantages, their absences constitute a true need, not an extravagant indulgence. They said about Hillel the elder, that he obtained for a poor person of noble descent a horse upon which to ride and a servant to run in front of him. One time he did not find a servant to run in front of him, and Hillel himself ran in front of him for 3 meals, it's about 3 miles actually, to fulfill the dictate for whatever he needs. This is what the Talmud says. We're using Haman as the paradigm for understanding what it is to love someone as yourself. Don't think, what would they want? It's okay. But also think, if you were them, what would you want? And then do that for them. That's what the Talmud is giving as an example for how do you love your neighbor as yourself. But again, look at number 19. It's a commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's not a suggestion. It's a fundamental principle, Hillel says. So my question is, can one be commanded to love? We've talked about the different dimensions of love. Is that an emotion that can be summed up by command? 19. A non-Jewish person came before Shammai and said to Shammai, convert me to Judaism on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on 1 foot. This may sound familiar to you. This is the expression al regel achat, which is teaching the whole Torah al regel achat. So it's become a kind of an idiomatic expression today. Let me tell you the whole thing on 1 foot, which means I'll summarize it for you quickly. This is where it comes from. Shammai pushed him away with the builder's cubit. This was a common measuring stick, and Shammai was a builder by trade. By the way, Shammai, this is not only that it's a measuring cubit, but Shammai was a very exacting person. You'll see other places in the Talmud where people came to Shammai for judgments, and he was very precise, very unforgiving in the way he looked at things. The same person, so he pushed him away. No, I'm not going to, this crazy idea, no. The same person came for Hillel. Hillel converted him and said to him, did he say, love your neighbor as yourself? No, this is what he said. That which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That's the entire Torah, and the rest is commentary. Go study. So why do you think Hillel, knowing what the Torah says about loving a person as another person as yourself, knowing this is a fundamental principle, sharing this with a potential convert about this is what it means to be Jewish, why did he put it in the passive sense? That which is hateful to you, don't do, rather than love your neighbor as yourself. Any thoughts on that?
I have a thought on it.
Ruth. I'm sorry.
Oh, do you want to speak?
No, go ahead. Just who is it, please?
Okay. So I've always thought about this verse before, and I thought it's interesting because what if someone is a miser? Like, what if someone wouldn't buy themselves a new pair of shoes till it was worn through, or their children, right? So does that mean that it's okay not to do it for someone else because that's their standard? And I think it's only because it's followed by the colon to remember God that you have to remember that there's an obligation to love yourself, that it's not okay to be bad to yourself, to not give yourself what you need.
Okay.
And I think it's if you're giving it without explanation, which at this point he's giving him like the quick and easy, the Torah for dummies in
On 1 foot
version, then the notion is it's easier to understand what it means not to do something hateful than to do something loving. And so the rest you're supposed to study. You're supposed to figure out what this really means. But the quick answer is, you know how not to be mean.
Okay, good.
I also think there's a presumptuousness to treating someone the way we want to be treated. There's an assumption that everybody has the same preferences, and so why should I be so presumptuous as to think I know what the other person wants just because it's what I would want? which is kind of the opposite of all the examples you just gave about the Haman story.
I'm giving the Haman story just to also let us know, I don't think it's one or the other. I think, look, this is clearly, I say clearly, this seems to me to be an interpersonal reaction. It's two people, right? So I think what the various sources are coming to tell you is take both of these into account. You know, what does the other person want? And maybe even take it further. What is it that you want that maybe you're being a little bit miserly about that you really should give that other person? It doesn't mean that your needs replace the other person's needs. It means don't only think about what that person would want, put yourself in that person's position. Any other thoughts about why Hillel went passive? It's going to come back. Let's keep going. Look on page 6. Here's another example of love in our text. It's very, very familiar to us, I believe. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, right? And then the very, very next line is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Again, it's a command. How are you commanded? How are you commanded to love God? How are you commanded to love your neighbor? Let's keep going. If you happen to be in Zichron Yaakov, this is just a little bit of an anecdote. If you happen to be in Zichron Yaakov, there's a lovely conservative synagogue there called Kehilat Ve'ahavta, because they take these two pillars of Judaism, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, you should love your neighbor, you should love God. And they say these are the two pillars upon which our congregation stands. So it's just a nice little sentiment. There's more love in 24. Not only to love your neighbor, not only to love God, not only to love your spouse, which we've seen from the examples of our ancestors, but look at number 24. There's more love. Love the stranger. And I know I'm speaking to people who understand the power of this command, because it's in the Torah, not one time, not 3 times, not 30 times, but 36 times at least. More than any other commandment in the Torah, love the stranger, love the stranger, love the stranger. 36 times. So why? How can you be commanded? I want to give a suggestion. The word in Hebrew is ve'ahavta, and you shall love. So it can be interpreted as a command, but also notice in the Hebrew construct, the word is in the future tense. Ve'ahavta, you will love. And so I think it's hints to us saying, this is kind of an aspirational condition. You can't flip it on and off like a switch. But God is saying, this is something that as a Jew, I really want you to work on. I want you to work on V'ahavta et Hager. I want you to work on you getting to love the stranger. I want you to work on V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you getting to love your neighbor as yourself. I want you to work on V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. I want you to understand over time, figure it out, work on it, how to love me. It's an aspirational kind of idea. It's an aspirational goal for us, rather than a kind of a binary thing where it's either flipped on or off. That's just a suggestion I want to put out there to help us wrestle with the question that I raised, which maybe now you have as well, which is, how can it really be a command? Commands to love. Any reaction or response to my suggestion?
I love it. I love it.
What do you mean by love? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it makes sense, and I think it's something that is motivational when you share it in that way.
Good. Thank you.
And love means different things to different people. So it also asks people to think about, what does it mean to you to love God, to love others, to love strangers?
What does it mean to the other to be loved? What does that mean for that person? So you can meet them where it's meaningful for them as well. Good. Thank you.
I also think that in terms of commanding love, that there might be some aspect to it where we need to behave as if we love in order to, and that can be commanded, actions. And with that sense that emotion will follow.
There are studies that show, and I can't quote them, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but that behavior patterns emotions. Which is, by the way, when the Rambam, when Maimonides was asked, if you had a choice between giving $1,000 once or $1 1,000 times, what should one do? His advice was to give $1 1,000 times because it conditions you to be a giver. Along the same lines. Let's look at number 25. There's even more love coming our way. Hold on. Hillel and Shammai. Now, Hillel and Shammai, you saw from the previous example, they gave different, very, very different answers. Hillel and Shammai are classic clashers in the Talmud. They disagree most of the time. Here they actually agree. Hillel and Shammai received the oral tradition from them. Hillel actually is quoting it, but they received this tradition together. Be of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, loving mankind and drawing them close to the Torah. So first, my first point is that they agree on this very, very basic concept. But what does this mean? The lovers be like the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace. So the descendants of Aaron, who is the first high priest, Kohen Gadol, Moses' older brother, their descendants still today, every once in a while, depending on what synagogue you're in, will move to the front of the synagogue and bless the congregation. And like every other commandment, it's preceded with a command blessing. And it's on page 7. Here's the blessing. By the way, in 26, there's a picture of the right-hand side is a translation. The left-hand side is a facsimile of the oldest text from the Bible that has ever been found archaeologically. It was written on silver scroll. It was discovered in 1979. It dates back to before the destruction of the first temple. And when finally we got the technology to unroll it without cracking it to smithereens, in the text, the Hebrew text of the time, it says the priestly blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you, etc., etc. This blessing of love from that Aaron and his descendants had to give to the Jews with love. That's the oldest existing Torah text that we have. And here's the mitzvah blessing that precedes it. Blessed are you, Lord our God, etc., who has commanded us with the holiness of Aaron to bless his people Israel with love. I've got to get up there and do this commandment with love. And if I can't, I'm going to sit this one out. And there's more love. This gets complicated. Number 29. When the boys grew up, Esav became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Now listen to look at the way I've bolded some things that follow. Isaac favored or loved Esau because he had a taste for game. Esau was a hunter. He gave Isaac meat. But Rebekah loves Jacob. Isaac was a conditional. He loved because he had a taste for game. Rebekah's love for Jacob was unconditional. She loves. Doesn't matter what. She loves. She loves. She loves. Look at number 31. Because this is an example of love that is dependent on something. And here's what we learn in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. All love that depends on something, when the thing ceases, the love ceases. And all the love that does not depend on anything will never cease. So I just gave you an example in 29 of that conditional love and the unconditional love. The Pirkei Avot gives a couple of more. What is an example of love that depended on something? Such was the love of Amnon and Tamar. So Amnon and Tamar they were step brother and sister. Tamar was the daughter of Michal, the wife of King David. Amnon was also a son through another wife. Amnon was obsessed with Tamar, love in a very obsessive kind of way. He constantly wanted her to sleep with him. She constantly rebuffed his advances, till finally he raped her. And once that occurred, he never wanted to see her again. Aside from the tragedy of the situation, what's being brought here is this is an example of a love that's dependent on something. It was physical, it was not deeper than that. And what is an example of love that did not depend on anything? Such was the love of David and Jonathan. This famous love between these two men. It's told in a very beautiful way throughout the Torah. And why did I bring this example? It's because sometimes we have to look after this. Sometimes, love is dependent on something. Sometimes we manipulate people because we want something, or there's a part of the relationship that we want to take advantage of, and we express it through love. And so there's another side to this sword. Just wanted to raise it because Judaism recognizes it, and it's true. It rings true.
Bob?
Yes.
I just have a question because you're using Rebecca as an example of just like a kind of complete love.
Unconditional love. Unconditional love.
But it's unconditional for only one of her two sons. So isn't it problematic? It doesn't say she loved both of them. She loves only Jacob.
Anybody want to help me out? You know, Carol, I'm not sure that the Torah is bringing the sentence to say that she didn't love Esav. And I'm not even sure she did. I mean, there could have been a maternal obligatory love, but maybe nothing beyond that.
I mean, I've always had a problem with her when we use her as an exemplar of love because I have a problem with the way she loves her children or doesn't seem to love them the same.
All right.
Well,
so,
your problem then would have to be the same with Isaac. I mean,
yeah, yes, because his love is even more restricted. So yes, you're right, but I don't see her as a paragon of love.
You know, it could have to do with my translation, but I was only translating based on the Hebrew word ahav, right? There in the original text, it's v'ahav Yitzchak and Rivka ohevet. The translation says favored, maybe because the translator anticipated your question, Carol. Look, you know, love is a many splendid thing. It's also complicated. I don't know what to tell you. I thought this was an example, and so maybe it's not the best example of something that is dependent on something. Maybe it's not the best example. Maybe that's why Pirkei Avot didn't bring this example. So good. So let's just go on. Is that okay? But I appreciate you writing that. Thanks. So on top of page 8, this is a new graffiti that's appearing throughout Israel. I just thought you'd appreciate it. It says, "V'ahavta l'reacha gam im hu lo kamacha." We insert the words, love your neighbor, even when he or she is not like yourself. And that's a very 2019 kind of thing to think about. So how does all this relate to our work? I'm just speaking to you as volunteer leadership of our community. And I presented this to the professional leadership of our community. We talk about love, 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 okay? Let's look at number 34. Here's the word philanthropy. And Wikipedia, by the way, I think has pretty good definitions for all three. I'm bringing all three. Philanthropy means love of humanity. There it is, right there. And has a distinguishing characteristic separate from charity. The difference commonly cited is that charity, that's okay. There's a difference between charity and philosophy. Interesting, but not relevant terribly right here. Philanthropy, love of humanity. Let's look at the word charity. Charity originated in late Old English to mean a Christian love of one's fellow. And up until at least the beginning of the 20th century, this meaning remained synonymous with charity. Over time, the meaning of charity has shifted from one of Christian love to that of providing for those in need, generosity, and giving. So we've got love as the root of philanthropy, we've got love as the root of charity, but let's look at what we do. We say, we don't do philanthropy, we don't do charity, we constantly say we do tzedakah. So let's look at tzedakah. Tzedakah is the Hebrew word number 36. Tzedakah is the Hebrew word literally meaning justice or righteousness, but commonly used to signify charity. Notably, this concept of charity is different from the modern Western understanding of charity, which is typically understood as a spontaneous act of goodwill and a marker of generosity. As tzedakah is rather an ethical obligation in Judaism, tzedakah refers to the religious obligation to do what is right and just, which Judaism emphasizes an important part of living a spiritual life. Thus, unlike voluntary philanthropy, tzedakah is seen as a religious obligation that must be performed regardless of one's financial standing, as considered mandatory, even for those with limited financial means. More broadly, tzedakah is considered to be one of the three main acts that can positively influence an unfavorable heavenly decree. So surprise, surprise. Where is the tzedakah that we refer to? We talk about giving tzedakah. We talk about putting money in the tzedakah box. Of all the times that tzedakah is mentioned in the Bible, how many times does that word tzedakah refer to our act of giving money? Here's the answer. Zippity, do, and da. Never. The closest it comes to actually helping someone with money is source number 37. If he's a needy man, you shall not go to sleep in his pledge. In other words, if you've taken collateral, you need to give it back. You must return the pledge to him at sundown, that he may sleep in his cloth and bless you, and will be to your merit, tzedakah, before the Lord your God. So, I just want to summarize because I know we're running out of time. The word tzedakah is never referred to in terms of giving something to someone. Rather, tzedakah is presented as a love of people, caring for people, as we just saw in this example, empathy with people, an obligation between people. It is creating the social contract through any or all of these kinds of interactions. So now I want to bring us back to Tu B'Av, and with this I hope we'll finish on page 9, number 38. Meanwhile, back at Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. This comes from Rabbi Dov Linzer, who is the president of Yeshiva Chovei Torah. He's the Rosh Yeshiva there. It's a modern day source. The story of the spies, remember the spies, which was the origin of the Tu B'Av story, the curse on the 9th, and then the dying stopped on the 15th? The story of the spies returning with their evil report is well known, but the reason they were punished is not commonly understood. What did they do wrong? They reported what they saw accurately. Ramban suggests an answer. The key, he says, is their use of the word ephes. If you'll recall, they said all these wonderful laudatory things about the land of Israel, and then they said ephes, however, but, and then they came up with these objections that overwhelmed the Jewish people who previously saw where their eyes were enlightened and delighted to enter the land because they could hear through the spies what it would mean for them. And then the word ephes destroyed it all. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful and the cities are fortified and very large. Ramban says that ephes means nothing here. It later came to mean zero. It means the word zero, the number zero, but here ephes means the word nothing. Their wickedness was, so what was their crime? Their wickedness was in their use of the word ephes, which indicates that the matter is completely impossible. To say that it was impossible demoralized the people and demonstrated, perhaps even propagated, a lack of faith in God. He continues, Rabbi Linzer. Quite often, our expectations of worthwhileness or the likely success of our endeavors become self-fulfilling prophecies. When we start believing that something is impossible, ephes, or that the effort is not worth it, then it will be impossible, and we will fail. But if we believe that the cause is good, that it is achievable, and that God is on our side, then we are likely to make our imagined future a reality. To quote from the late Muhammad Ali, impossible is just a small word that is thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in a world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible, ephes, is not a fact, it is an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it is a dare. Impossible is potential, impossible is temporary, impossible is nothing. Impossible is ephes. Impossible is temporary, impossible is nothing. So the Ramban says that the word ephes was their undoing, the sense that it can't be done. And I want to say to you, as I've said to my colleagues here at the Federation, here we're talking about the work of the Federation. We're talking about raising the resources and allocating the resources so that we can make the impossible possible. But I want to say to you, whether you're looking at this as someone who's involved in a federation or any other aspect of your life, the word love here, the aspiration is to negate the word ephes, to knock it out, to enable us to see beyond the ephes, to use the love as the aspirational goal to get beyond the artificial barrier of the FS that sometimes comes in front of us. And we'll close with what Dr. Seuss said on number 39. You know you're in love when you can't fall asleep, because reality is finally better than your dreams. And so I'll say to you, and this can apply to anything else, but in terms of the work of our federation, you know, we say we've got a slogan: we care, we build, we save. I also want to add that we love, because without that, all the rest becomes possible. With that, all the rest becomes possible.